I want to tell you something that most people don't know about me. I have never, not once in my entire life, had a good night's sleep. Not as a child, not as a teenager, not now. And I know what you're thinking. Nadia, everyone has trouble sleeping sometimes. But this is different. This isn't the kind of tired that a cup of coffee fixes. This isn't the kind of restless that goes away after a stressful week at work. This is something I was born into. My earliest memory, and I mean the earliest thing I can pull from my brain, is not my mother's face. It's not Christmas morning. It's not my first birthday cake. My earliest memory is waking up at 3 a.m, sitting upright in my little toddler bed, heart hammering in my chest, completely convinced that something was standing in the corner of my room. I was 5 years old. My mom would come rushing in every single night like clockwork. She'd turn on the light. She'd check the wardrobe, under the bed, behind the curtains. Every night she did this, and every night nothing was there. She'd hold me and say, "It's just a dream, baby. There's nothing there. You're safe." And I believed her. In that moment, with the light on and her arms around me, I believed her. But the second she left the room and turned that light off, I knew. I knew that whatever was in that room hadn't left. It had just stepped back, moved out of the light, waited. I grew up like that, every single night. A battle between me and the dark, and the dark. It never, ever got tired. Other kids at school would talk about their dreams, unicorns, flying, showing up to school in their pajamas. The usual. I never had those dreams. I never had a single dream that didn't scare me. And as I got older, I started to think, maybe this is just who I am. Maybe some people are built for the dark and I'm just not one of them. Maybe I'm just sensitive. Maybe my imagination is overactive. I told myself those things for years. I was wrong. By the time I was about 8 or 9, the bad nights had a pattern. It wasn't random anymore. It wasn't just an occasional scare here and there. Every single night, I would fall asleep, and within what felt like minutes, I would be somewhere else entirely, somewhere dark, somewhere that felt wrong in a way I couldn't explain even if I tried. The nightmares were never the same. The settings changed. The details changed. But the feeling, that feeling was always identical. That cold, creeping, stomach-dropping certainty that I was not alone, that something was close, that something knew my name. I'd see shadows moving, shapes that didn't quite make sense, doors that opened by themselves, corridors that stretched on forever, and always, this sense that if I turned around, I would see something I could never unsee. I never turned around. In every single nightmare, I could feel whatever it was right behind me, breathing, waiting, and I would just run or freeze or scream with no sound coming out. You know that nightmare. Everyone's had a version of it, but imagine that is your every single night. Not occasionally, not once a week, every single night. By the time I hit my early teens, I was what doctors politely called a chronic insomniac. I fought sleep. I resented sleep because sleep wasn't rest for me. It was a door, and on the other side of that door was something I did not want to face. So I stopped opening the door. I would stay awake as long as I possibly could, watching TV, reading, staring at the ceiling, anything to delay the moment my eyes closed. My record at that age was 38 hours without sleep. I crashed eventually. I always did. Your body takes over at some point. It doesn't give you a choice. But for those 38 hours, nothing came for me. That felt like a victory. A small, exhausting, completely unsustainable victory. My parents took me to see people, therapists, sleep specialists, a very kind woman who lit candles and asked me to describe my childhood bedroom in detail. They all said variations of the same thing. Anxiety, overactive imagination, childhood trauma responses, and maybe some of that was true. I'm not dismissing any of it. But here's the thing none of them could explain. How could I be imagining something that hadn't happened yet? I moved into this house about 2 years ago. It's an older house. Older houses make noise. I know that. Pipes settle, wood contracts, wind finds gaps. I know all of that. I told myself all of that. But the noises I'm talking about started coming from one specific place. The attic, not the roof, not the walls, not some vague somewhere upstairs. The attic, directly above my bedroom. At first it was subtle, just enough to make you pause what you were doing and tilt your head and think, did I just hear? And then it would stop, and you'd convince yourself it was nothing. I am very good at convincing myself things are nothing. Years of practice. But midnight, and I want you to note this time because it matters, midnight is always when it got louder. I'm already awake at midnight, of course. We've established that. The insomniac in me is wide-eyed and caffeinated and watching the clock like it owes me something. So I am perfectly positioned to hear every single thing this house decides to say. And what it said at midnight was this. Footsteps. Not heavy, not frantic, measured, like someone walking slowly across a room, back and forth, deliberately, like someone who was completely comfortable where they were and had no particular need to hide. The first time I heard it, I grabbed my phone, pulled up the torch, and stood at the bottom of the attic stairs for a full 10 minutes. Silence. I told myself, old house, probably an animal. Maybe a bird had gotten in somehow. Maybe a fox. These things happen. The second night it happened. Same time, same measured footsteps. I went to the bottom of the stairs again. And this time, before I could convince myself it was nothing, I heard something else. It wasn't footsteps. It was a sound that I couldn't immediately categorize. It was too low to be clear, too deliberate to be random. It was almost like the idea of a sound, like something that was almost language but hadn't quite decided to be yet. I went back to bed. I pulled the covers up. I stared at the ceiling, and I thought, it's fine. It's absolutely fine. But I left the light on. Nadia. Here's where things changed. For most of my life, the nightmares and the waking world had a clear border. Asleep, things came for me. Awake, I was safe. That was the deal. That was the agreement. The whispers broke that agreement. It started small. I'd be washing up in the kitchen, and I'd think I heard someone say my name. I'd be in the shower, and I'd catch the tail end of something. Not quite a word, but shaped like one. I'd be sitting in complete silence reading, and the air would shift in a way that made me hold my breath and listen. And at night, in that half space between being awake and being gone, the whispers were there, waiting at the edge of my consciousness like they'd been there the whole time and were only just now letting me notice them. They weren't the nightmares I knew. The nightmares had images, shadows, shapes, corridors. These were different. There were no images. There were no scenes, just voices at the very edge of comprehension. 2 voices. I became certain of that over time. 2 distinct voices that weren't quite talking to me, but talking near me, like I had walked into the middle of a conversation that had been going on for a very long time. And the dark figures, they came with the whispers, not fully formed, not solid, just impressions at the back of my mind. The suggestion of 2 people, tall, still, watching something I couldn't see. I started dreading the hour before midnight more than I dreaded sleep itself, because that was when the whispers got clearest. That was when the figures felt closest. Something was becoming more defined, more present, like static on a radio gradually tuning into a station. I just couldn't hear the words yet. The night it happened, and when I say happened, I want you to understand that every part of me still debates what that word means in this context. The night it happened was a Wednesday. I remember that specifically. Wednesday. Nothing special about a Wednesday. No particular stress that day. No unusual triggers. I'd had a normal enough evening, dinner, some television. the usual losing battle with sleep. By 11:30, I was lying in bed, awake, doing what I always do, making deals with my own brain. Just close your eyes. Just try. Nothing is going to happen. And then, midnight, like clockwork. The whispers found me before I was even close to asleep, but this time they were different. This time they weren't at the edge. They were clear. Not the words, not yet, but the presence of them, the intention behind them, like two people in the next room who had stopped caring about keeping their voices down. I sat up. I don't know why I sat up. Muscle memory, maybe, or something older than muscle memory, something instinctive. And then I heard it. Not in my head, not behind my eyes, not in that space between awake and asleep. From the attic, above me, clear as anything. Two voices, and without making a decision, without thinking about it for even a second, I was out of bed, in the hallway, at the bottom of the attic stairs, my hand on the railing, going up. The attic door was open, not all the way, just enough, just a crack, maybe 4-5 inches, and through that gap came the faintest warm light, not electric, softer than that, amber almost, like candlelight, and the voices, unmistakable now, two of them, unhurried, completely calm, like two old friends catching up over something comfortable and familiar. I pressed myself against the wall beside that door. I didn't breathe. I couldn't see them clearly. I want to be honest about that. I couldn't see faces. I couldn't see details. What I could make out, through that thin gap in the door, were two shapes, two figures seated across from each other. One seemed taller, broader. Something about the way it held itself made me think man, though I couldn't tell you why with any certainty. The other was smaller, more composed. Something about its stillness made me think woman. Between them, and this detail has stayed with me more than anything else, between them was a table, and on that table were two cups. They were having tea. Two figures I could not fully see in my attic at midnight, speaking in voices that had lived in my nightmares since I was 5 years old, having tea and talking. I pressed closer to the gap and I listened. Their conversation was unhurried, almost domestic. They spoke about timing, about patience, about the particular satisfaction of a long process finally reaching its conclusion. The man's voice, low, deliberate, talked about preparation, about how certain things couldn't be rushed. The woman's voice, and it was measured, almost amused, agreed. She talked about proximity, about how the closer you get, the less they notice, about how by the time it becomes obvious, it's far too late. They talked about their next one with the ease of people who had done this many times before, and I stood there, frozen, listening, every nightmare I had ever had suddenly making a terrible kind of sense. And then the woman's voice said something that turned every part of me to ice. She said, and I am telling you exactly what I heard. Should we move on to the matter at hand? And the man said, almost pleasantly, I think it's time. She's been behind that door long enough, don't you think? And the woman laughed, quiet, warm, completely unhurried. She has. I ran. I don't remember the stairs. I don't remember the hallway. I don't remember getting back into my room or pulling the covers over my head or screaming into my pillow. But I must have done all of those things because the next thing I knew, I was in bed, heart hammering, hands shaking. And it was morning, sunlight coming through the curtain, birds outside, the completely normal, completely indifferent morning light of a Thursday. I lay there for a long time, staring at the ceiling. It was a dream. That's what I told myself. Same thing my mother told me when I was 5. It was just a dream. There's nothing there. You're safe. I got up. I made tea. The irony of that did not escape me. I sat at my kitchen table and I ran through every rational explanation available to me. Vivid dreaming, sleep paralysis, the particular cruelty of an overactive imagination that had spent 30-something years perfecting its craft. I believed those explanations. I almost entirely believed those explanations. But I haven't been back up to the attic. And every night, at midnight, I still hear them. And every night I remind myself, it's just a dream. It's just a dream.